Matter of a few verses, we hear 5 different likenesses to the kingdom of heaven. It's interesting that the passage begins by saying another parable, because it really isn't a parable. In our day and age, we would call it a simile. Whenever you have the word like, something is like something, that's a simile. Whenever you have a parable, it's a story put alongside of an actual earthly kind of experience. So they go parallel with each other. But that's just kind of a minute detail. But have you ever heard anybody say similar? There's no U in similar, just for your education today. We have 5 similes of the kingdom of heaven. The first one is, I would call it a sort of a universal, or you might even say a Catholic simile, because it's talking about a mustard seed that is planted and grows into a shrub and a tree. That's really kind of a simile for the church. One of the interesting things is we belong to a church that is worldwide in the Anglican Communion. 70, 80 million people around the world are a part of the Anglican Communion. What's interesting is that we did not have a definite plan to become a church worldwide. It all happened because wherever England went, so did the church, because the English needed a place to worship. And so that's how the church got spread around the world without an actual plan, but it became a reality in due time. And so, like a mustard seed, everywhere the English went, they planted the church. Many years ago, while I was still living in Miami, I decided I would go to the kitchen and get a mustard seed and take it outside and plant it and see what would become of it. Nothing. Quite to my surprise. However, I have reason to believe that seeds and herbs and those kinds of things that are prepared for cooking have really sort of been killed, you might say. They don't have any life in them that could produce more life. So I think that's what happened to my little experiment. But it was an attempt to try to understand how a small seed could become a shrub or a tree. Now, some of you might remember years ago, we used to see women in particular wearing a glass ball on a chain that had a seed in it. You remember those? They were basically a way to make a statement of faith. We could say, this reminds me of the mustard seed, which grew to become a great shrub. Or we could say, if your faith is as small as a mustard seed, so on. That was a symbol that was useful, and it could be a way to make a statement of faith. So that first simile about the mustard seed tells us that something even as small as a mustard seed can grow into something great and large. And that's, to me, also a very good simile for the church that has gone worldwide. Not just our branch, but Christianity is known worldwide. As we all know, not everybody believes in Christianity and in Jesus, but that witness is there. The next simile is yeast. This is kind of one of those things that's sort of a personal kind of thing. People who are skilled at baking have a sense of touch. They know when the dough feels right. I don't have that. My mother had that. She didn't pass that to me. There are other members in my family that do have that. They can just touch and feel and know when the dough is doing what it's supposed to do. And we know that yeast is very important. If you put it with flour, then you can make something that will rise. That's just sort of a nice kind of simile for the idea that what we have in our faith can bubble up and grow and can be spread. The next simile is like a treasure hidden in a field. It's kind of interesting that Jesus uses the dark side of humanity to tell this story, because he said a man found it and then he hid it and went away and bought the land in order to get it. That's kind of deceitful. But sometimes humans do deceitful things. But God can turn anything into good. And so that man knew that the treasure was of such great value, he had to have it. And that's a good simile for the kingdom of heaven. The next one, about the pearl, doesn't have anything deceitful going on in it, but it's a similar idea. A man is in search of fine pearls, and he finds one that is so wonderful. He goes and sells everything he has in order to buy that one pearl. That's how valuable the kingdom of heaven is when we look at it that way. And then the last one is about a net that is thrown into the water and gathers up fish of all kinds. That's kind of a eschatological simile. It's about the end times, actually. And what the writer is trying to convey to us through the words of Jesus is that the whole kingdom can be gathered into a net. And then at the end of the age, they'll be separated, the good from the bad. Now, you might remember last week's gospel lesson dealt with weeds and grain. In that parable, Jesus said, don't pull out the weeds, you'll pull up some of the wheat. It's another way of saying it's not our job to determine who is a weed and who's good. That's God's job. In the same way with this net, that's God's job at the end of the age. But actually, it's both stories say it's the angels that will separate. It's an interesting kind of idea to think that one day we'll all be gathered and the angels will come and separate the good from the bad. We all hope that we're all going to make it, that we're all good, and that there won't be any bad thrown into the furnace of fire, which unfortunately supports the whole idea of hell and a place of perpetual burning fire, which I personally do not believe in. I think that it's possible for a human being to choose to separate themselves from God, and that's their choice. But what God wants is for all of us to be in the net, for all of us to be in the kingdom, so that there would not be any that would be cast aside. Well, that's your lesson today on similes. And they have much good things to teach us.